Throughout his entire life, that cat was treated like a mistake. He wasn't aggressive, he wasn't sick, he didn't make a mess. Even so, nobody wanted him. There was always an excuse. He was too old, too quiet, too dull. He grew up watching people being chosen, animals being taken away, while he remained behind, like something forgotten that nobody had the courage to claim. Until the day everything collapsed. The voices disappeared, the doors closed, the house became empty. And then, for the first time, they realized the cruel truth. The cat that nobody wanted was all that still remained. For years, that house functioned as a place of passage. People came and went, stories began and ended, decisions were made without much care. There was always something more urgent, more important, more worthy of attention. In the midst of all this, there was a cat, or rather, there was a living being that occupied space, breathed the same air, but was never truly considered part of anything. He wasn't hated, he wasn't explicitly mistreated, he simply wasn't desired, and this absence of desire shaped his entire existence. From early on, the cat learned to recognize gazes that looked away, hands that did not reach out, voices that never pronounced a name. Whenever someone spoke about animals, he was the one left for later. Maybe later, they would say. Not now. This "not now" stretched on for years. He grew up waiting for a moment that never arrived, watching others be chosen while remaining in exactly the same place. The constant rejection did not come in the form of harsh words, but in repeated silence. Over time, the cat stopped waiting actively. He began to exist in a discreet, almost careful way, as if occupying space were a mistake. He slept in forgotten corners, walked close to the walls, avoided crossing the path of those who clearly did not want to deal with him. Even so, he remained, not out of romantic hope, but because staying was the only option he had left. Meanwhile, the house changed. Relationships wore down, people departed, promises broke. One by one, everyone found a way out of there. Everyone, except the cat. When the house finally became empty, there was no goodbye for him. No decision was made regarding him. He simply stayed. And it was only in this absolute silence that the truth revealed itself with brutality. That which nobody wanted for years was now all that there was. If this story has already started to touch you, leave your like. Now, it helps the channel a lot to continue. Subscribe as well, because I have a dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers, and every subscription makes an enormous difference to me. And tell me in the comments, from which country are you watching this story? From the very first day, that cat understood that there was no place reserved for him. Not because anyone had said it out loud, but because the world around him made a point of demonstrating it in small gestures, repeated with cruel precision. When he arrived at that house, still a kitten, he was placed on the floor without ceremony, while adults discussed other, more important things. There was no introduction, nor any true curiosity. He was there because someone thought maybe it would be a good idea. That maybe never turned into a certainty. In the early days, the cat tried to exist like any other would. He walked behind people, watched every movement, tried to get close when someone sat down. His small body sought warmth, attention, some kind of recognition. But he always encountered invisible barriers, legs that moved away, doors that closed, hands too busy to touch him. There was no aggressiveness, and that made it all even more confusing. He didn't understand what he was doing wrong. He only noticed that his presence provoked no reaction at all. Over time, he began to notice a painful pattern. Whenever anyone spoke of choosing something, he was not part of the decision. When the subject was animals, his existence was treated as a detail. He stays, they would say. Staying never sounded like a choice. It sounded like a postponement. It sounded like a weight pushed off for later. The cat learned to recognize this tone, even without understanding the words. It was the tone of someone who doesn't want something, but also doesn't want to deal with the guilt of refusing. The house was busy. People came and went, carrying their own urgencies. Children grew up. Adults grew tired. Arguments emerged and disappeared. There was noise, occasional laughter, muffled fights behind closed doors. In the middle of all this, the cat circulated like a shadow. He learned to walk close to the walls, to choose times when no one was around, to sleep in places where he didn't get in the way. He wasn't taught to do this. He was shaped by the repetition of rejection. While other animals were treated like members of the family, he was treated like an object that no one remembered to put away. The dog received a name, special food, daily attention. The cat watched it all from a distance, with a silent curiosity that gradually turned into bitter understanding. There was not enough space for everyone, and he clearly was not included. Years passed without anyone noticing his transformation. The kitten grew up, grew thin, grew quieter. His fur lost its shine, his movements became slower. Even so, no one commented. No one wondered if he was okay. When someone caught a glimpse of him, they even seemed surprised, as if he appeared out of nowhere. The cat began to understand that for others, he had no narrative. He was not part of the history of the house. He was just a detail that persisted. There were moments when he tried again. On quieter nights, when someone seemed sad or tired, he would approach with caution, slowly leaning his body against them. Sometimes he received a quick, automatic touch, almost by reflex. Other times he was pushed away without words. Each frustrated attempt reinforced a painful lesson. It is not worth insisting. The cat learned to withdraw before being rejected. He learned to anticipate indifference. The constant rejection began to shape not only his behavior, but his perception of the world. He no longer expected food at set times. He ate when something became available, without creating expectation. He slept lightly, always alert, as if he needed to be ready to disappear at any moment. The fear was not of being attacked, but of being a bother, of existing too much. Meanwhile, human life followed its inevitable course. People began to leave the house, one by one. The first departure was marked by boxes, goodbyes, and promises to visit. The cat watched it all from a distance, smelling the change even before it happened. When the door closed and that person did not return, he realized something the others ignored. The house had lost a part of itself. Other departures followed, some final, others temporary. Each absence made the house larger, colder, more silent. The cat began to walk through the empty rooms, sniffing the past. Each abandoned room carried a different echo. He felt all of this intensely because he had always been attentive. He had always needed to observe to survive. At no point did anyone stop to think about the cat. When someone left, they took their belongings, their memories, their bonds. The cat was never considered a bond. He was just something that stayed. And so, without fanfare, he became the only constant presence in that space that was slowly emptying. There was a specific day when the rejection gained a different weight. One of the last residents was arguing out loud, walking back and forth. The cat was there, watching as always. In a moment of exhaustion, that person stopped, sat on the sofa, and put their hands to their face. The cat approached with extreme care. He climbed onto the sofa, leaning his warm body beside that human pain. He stayed motionless, offering the only comfort. He knew. For a few seconds it seemed to work. A hand came down, touched his fur. The cat closed his eyes, feeling something rare. But soon the touch ceased. The person stood up, pushing him lightly to make space. There was no anger, nor words, only distraction. The cat jumped off the sofa and went back to his corner. That was the last time he tried to be chosen. After that, he simply existed. He observed, he breathed, he remained. Not because he believed anything would change, but because he had never learned to leave. When the last human left the house, leaving the key on the table, the cat was lying in the hallway. The door closed. The sound echoed through the empty space. There was no goodbye. There was no decision. He simply stayed. And it was there, in that heavy silence, that something began to slowly reveal itself. The cat that nobody wanted was now the only living being inside that house. Not by choice, not by merit, but because everyone else had the option to leave. He did not. When the house finally became empty, the silence did not arrive all at once. It settled in gradually, like an insistent visitor that no one can drive away. On the first day, the cat still heard echoes that no longer existed, imaginary footsteps, doors that did not open, voices that seemed to come from somewhere far off. He remained alert, sitting in the hallway, as he always did when someone took a long time to return. There was no outward anxiety, only habit. Waiting had been part of his routine since he had learned not to be chosen. The following days revealed an uncomfortable truth. No one would return. The cat began to walk through the house more frequently, not out of curiosity, but out of a need for confirmation. Each empty room was a silent answer. The bedroom that once had a human scent was now cold. The kitchen held only old scraps. The living room seemed too large, as if it had been designed for a life that no longer existed. The cat walked slowly, sniffing the air, trying to understand how something so full had become so empty. Hunger appeared in a different way than he had known before. It was not just the wait for forgotten scraps. It was the complete absence of predictability. Before, even though ignored, he knew that at some point someone would eat. Now there were no schedules, no oversights. The dish remained empty for days. The cat tried to resist as he always had, saving energy, sleeping more, moving less. But his body began to claim its price. He began to explore places he had never needed to explore. He opened doors with his muzzle, knocked over small objects in the hope of finding something edible. He found only dust, old papers, ancient smells that deceived his stomach for a few seconds. At night, he lay on the cold floor, feeling the emptiness grow inside him. Still, he did not meow. He did not call out. Silence had been his language for too long. As the days passed, his body began to visibly weaken. His paws trembled after small efforts. Jumps, once calculated, became risky. The cat began to avoid unnecessary movements. He slept in strategic locations where the sunlight entered for a few minutes, warming his tired body. The house seemed to watch him, large and indifferent, as it had always been. At times he would approach the front door, not out of conscious hope, but out of memory. There, so many times, someone had entered and left. Now, the door remained closed, silent. The cat sat before it for long periods, looking at the motionless wood. He did not meow. He did not scratch. He just waited, as if repetition could bring back something that had already departed for good. Time lost its meaning. Days and nights blurred together. Sunlight ceased to be a sign of activity, and darkness brought no rest. The cat woke with his own stomach growling, slept with the constant sensation of weakness. Still, he remained. Remaining had always been his only choice. On a particularly cold morning, a different noise cut through the silence. It was not imaginary, it was real. The cat raised his head immediately, eyes alert, body tense. Voices came from outside. They were not familiar. They were quick, impersonal. He approached the window with caution, watching shadows move outside. People pointed at the house, talking about something he did not understand, but felt. The voices spoke of abandonment, of risk, of structural problems. The house, now empty, had become a nuisance, a problem to be solved. At no point did they mention the cat. He was there, alive, breathing, but again invisible. The old sensation returned with force. Existing did not mean being considered. When those people left, something was different. The front door was left ajar. The wind entered without resistance, bringing cold and a strange smell. The cat huddled in a high corner, watching the change in the environment. That opening represented something new, not freedom, danger. The house was no longer just empty. It had become unstable. That night, the weather changed abruptly. The sky darkened too early, and the wind began to beat against the old structure of the house. The cat felt the change in the air even before the rain began. He climbed onto a high piece of furniture, seeking safety. When the first drops fell, he was already alert. Water entered through the open door, spreading slowly across the floor. The cold advanced along with it. The rain increased in intensity, and with it came the sounds of the house. Reacting to the accumulated weight, dry snaps, long creaks, as if the walls were complaining about something that had been ignored for too long. The cat kept his eyes fixed on the ceiling, his body huddled, ready to react. The feeling was clear. Something was about to happen. The floor began to get slippery. Water accumulated in the lowest points, advancing without haste, but without pause. The cat felt the cold rise through his pores, piercing his already weak body. He tried to move to a higher place, but the effort was greater than he expected. His body responded with slowness, betraying the accumulated wear. When the first piece of the ceiling fell to the living room floor, the impact echoed throughout the house. The cat huddled, his heart racing. There was no longer any doubt. The house was giving way. That which had always ignored him was now becoming a real threat. He needed to leave. For the first time in his entire life, staying was no longer safe. Coming down from the furniture was difficult. His back paws failed for an instant, almost making him fall. Upon touching the wet floor, the thermal shock made his body tremble. Still, he advanced. Each step required total concentration. The sound of the rain masked his movements, but that no longer mattered. There was no one to be bothered, only the urgency to stay alive. He headed for the open door, feeling the wind push the rain inside. Outside, the night seemed immense and hostile. The cat stopped for an instant, observing the unknown. Throughout his life, he had learned to remain. Now he needed to depart. The contradiction was cruel, almost unbearable. Before he could decide, a louder crash shook the house. Part of the roof gave way, scattering water and debris. The cat recoiled in fear, slipping on the wet floor. A sharp pain shot through his body as he hit the wall. A low sound escaped his throat. There was no one to hear. Still, the pain was real, intense. He tried to get up, but his body responded with a delay. His breathing was short, irregular. Still, instinct spoke louder. Crawling, he resumed his path toward the exit. Each inch covered seemed like a bitter victory. The house continued to give way behind him, as if finally rejecting that which it never wanted to recognize. When he finally reached the door and went out into the rain, the cold hit him with full force. The soaked ground made any movement difficult. The cat advanced a few meters before falling again, now in the cold mud of the yard. He tried to get up, but his legs failed. The world spun slowly. The sound of the storm seemed distant. There, lying under the rain, the cat felt something different from everything he had known. It was not just abandonment. It was the limit. The life he had learned to sustain in silence was reaching a critical point. He tried to move once more, but his body did not respond. Fatigue, hunger, pain, and cold mixed into a single, overwhelming sensation. Time passed without him noticing. The rain gradually subsided, but the cold remained. His body shivered, his breath coming in irregular intervals. Still, life persisted, not by conscious choice, but by resistance. The cat that no one wanted was now fighting alone not to disappear completely. When the sky began to clear, bringing a weak and greyish light, the storm finally ceased. The surrounding scene was one of silent destruction. The house was partially damaged, the ground marked by water and mud. Near the door, almost blending in. With the ground itself, the cat remained motionless, once again invisible. But something had changed. Staying had ceased to be a safe option. The cat had crossed a limit from which there was no return. The story that had begun with silent rejection was now moving toward an inevitable consequence, and as the days slowly advanced, forces he could never have predicted were beginning to move. The dawn arrived slowly, almost as if it were afraid to reveal what the night had left behind. The weak light pierced through heavy clouds, spreading a greyish tone over the soaked yard and the wounded house. The cat remained motionless near the door, his small body blending into the mud, as if he were just another detail of the abandonment. His breathing was short and irregular, but it still existed. Every inspiration seemed to require a conscious effort, as if the body had to decide every second if it was worth continuing. He opened his eyes slowly. The world seemed distant, out of focus, as if being observed through a thick layer of glass. Sounds arrived muffled, the distant song of a bird, the persistent dripping of water falling from the broken roof, the light wind passing through the yard. Everything seemed too normal for someone who was so close to disappearing. The cat tried to move, but the simple effort of flexing one of his paws provoked an intense pain that ran through his body. He gave up immediately, becoming motionless once more. Hunger, which had always been a constant companion, was now almost secondary to the pain and the cold. Still, the body demanded energy it did not have. The cat felt his empty stomach contract, as if begging for something that would not come. He had already learned to ignore this plea. He had learned to endure. But now everything seemed harder. Remaining required more strength than he possessed. Time passed in a strange way. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like nothing. The sun rose slowly, slightly warming the air, but not enough. To reach his soaked body, the mud began to dry in some parts, pulling at his fur with a constant discomfort. The cat tried to lift his head again. He managed only a few inches before giving up. The world spun, and he closed his eyes once more. Then the scent arrived first, different from everything around it. It wasn't the mold of the house, nor the wet earth, nor the old smell of abandonment. It was human, recent. The cat did not react immediately. Throughout his life, human scents meant indifference, distraction, or absence. Still, something about this scent was different. There was no rush. There was no irritation. There was a tension. Footsteps approached slowly. They were neither hurried nor heavy. They were cautious, as if whoever was approaching was afraid of startling something fragile. A shadow was cast over the ground, blocking the weak sunlight. The cat opened his eyes with difficulty, trying to focus. A human figure was there, standing still, observing. They didn't pass straight by. They didn't look away. They remained. The woman took a few seconds to understand what she saw. At first glance, it seemed too late. The small, dirty, motionless body, the rigid posture, the nearly imperceptible breathing. She knelt slowly, feeling a tightness in her chest that she couldn't explain. This wasn't just an injured animal. It was abandonment materialized. When she reached out her hand, she hesitated. She didn't want to touch something that might have already departed. It was the subtle movement of the chest that changed everything. A rise and fall that was almost invisible, but enough. He was still alive. The woman felt urgency settle in immediately, but in a controlled way. She approached with extreme care, speaking in a low voice, even without knowing if he could hear. The cat felt the touch for the first time in a different way. It wasn't blunt, it wasn't automatic, it was intentional. He reacted with a slight tremor, not of fear, but of exhaustion. Other people approached, drawn by the scene. Comments arose in a contained tone. He was here for a long time. I always saw this cat. I thought someone looked after him. The sentences accumulated, each trying to ease a guilt that was beginning to emerge too late. The cat did not understand the words, but he felt the warmth of the hands that now enveloped him, pulling him away from the cold floor. A dry cloth was placed under his body. Upon being lifted, the world seemed to spin. Once more, the cat closed his eyes, concentrating only on breathing. He didn't fight. He didn't try to flee. He didn't have the strength for that. For the first time, someone was carrying him not out of convenience, but out of real necessity. That was too new to provoke any reaction other than silent surrender. The path to the car was short, but intense. Each human step made his body sway slightly, awakening pains he didn't know how to name. Still, there was something different about that. Experience, the constant warmth, the care not to press against his body, the low sound of the voice trying to calm him. He didn't understand the meaning, but he recognized the tone. It wasn't indifference. Inside the vehicle, the environment seemed too warm for his body, which was used to the cold. The shock made his muscles contract slightly. The woman adjusted the cloth around him, ensuring he was protected. During the journey, she spoke about the house, about how no one seemed to have noticed. The cat for all those years. There was indignation in her voice, but also sadness, not an abstract sadness, but one that was directed, as if, at that moment, she were facing something that should have been seen much sooner. The cat heard only fragments, sounds blended into a deep weariness. He drifted in and out of consciousness a few times, feeling the movement of the car, the distant sound of the city, the strong smell of places he had never known. Each new sensation was recorded slowly, as if the brain were choosing what was still worth processing. When they reached the destination, the change was immediate. Stronger lights, intense smells, metallic sounds. The cat tried to huddle, but firm and careful hands kept him safe. There was no aggression, only controlled urgency. He was placed on a firm and warm surface. The human touch now came accompanied by quick decisions, technical words, precise movements. The cat closed his eyes, too exhausted to resist. Meanwhile, outside, the abandoned house was beginning to become a subject of conversation. Neighbors gathered, commenting on the state of the property, on the risk it represented, on the evident abandonment. At some point, someone mentioned the cat. "He was always there," they said. "He never caused any trouble." The sentence echoed once more, now loaded with a different weight. He never caused any trouble. Perhaps that had been the biggest problem from the start. The cat went through exams, firmer touches, careful manipulations. His body reacted slowly, but it reacted. Every human gesture around him seemed guided by a late awareness that something had been neglected for too long. He didn't understand this. To him, the world had simply changed in an abrupt, almost violent way. When he was finally left to rest, enveloped in warmth and controlled silence, the cat remained motionless for a long time. His breathing was still irregular, but there was a rhythm. Someone remained at his side, watching closely. Not as someone expecting something in return, but as someone finally recognizing a presence that had always been there. In that strange space, surrounded by strangers who now saw him, something began to transform silently. It wasn't full trust. It was not joy. It was the painful transition between invisibility and late recognition. The cat that nobody wanted was now impossible to ignore, and although still far from any ending, a truth was beginning to impose itself with growing force. When nobody wanted him, he remained. Now, when he was all that was left, the world was finally forced to look at him. The cat did not know how much time had passed since he left the cold mud of the yard. To him, time had always been something imprecise, a sequence of sensations and survival. But now, in this new place, time felt different. There was light at defined hours. There were constant but controlled sounds. There were scents that repeated, as if the world around him obeyed a logic he had never known. He woke and slept in fragments, and between one interval and the next, he felt human hands approach with care. In the beginning, he reacted as he always had, by trying to disappear. Even weak, even without the strength to truly flee, his body would shrink at the slightest movement nearby. His eyes would snap open, alert, searching for danger. He had no memory of constant affection. Any attention came accompanied by suspicion. For years, being noticed was rare. Now, being noticed was inevitable. The contrast was too difficult for his instinct to accept. People spoke softly near him, not out of fear, but out of respect. There was a smoothness that didn't match anything he had learned about humans. One hand would adjust the fabric covering him, another would place a small bowl near his face. The smell of the food hit him with force, awakening something primal. Still, he hesitated, not because he wasn't hungry, but because life had taught him that good things do not last. That food could come and then vanish again. That hope was dangerous. When he finally licked the first portion, his body reacted as if it didn't believe it. It was soft, easy to swallow, and at the same time it carried a warmth that spread slowly inside. He ate slowly, in small amounts, as if afraid it would be taken away. The hands did not interfere. They did not hurry him. They simply waited. This waiting without demand was a novelty as great as the food itself. In the days that followed, the cat began to feel minute changes in his body. His breathing, which once came in irregular intervals, began to find a more stable rhythm. The pain in his side persisted, but it was no longer a constant blade. It had become a present, controlled memory, a warning that his body was still mending. Even so, he remained alert. The habit of surviving alone does not disappear easily. The environment around him was full of human signals, metallic sounds, doors opening and closing, voices overlapping in short conversations. He noticed when someone approached even before he saw them, by the scent and the change in the vibration of the space. A part of him still prepared to be ignored, as if at any moment the attention could vanish, and he would go back to being just an inconvenient detail. But the attention did not vanish. On the contrary, it seemed to grow in a silent way. The people who cared for him began to speak more about his story, not directly to him, but around him. They commented on the abandoned house, on the time he had likely lived there, on the state in which he was found. There was incredulity, indignation, and, above all, a question that repeated in different ways. How did no one see? This question had no easy answer, because seeing required intention. It required stopping. It required taking responsibility. And for years, no one wanted to do that. The cat, without understanding the words, felt the weight of them through the tone. It was a tone that carried something resembling guilt, and guilt in that place seemed to be the invisible currency everyone was paying. The woman who found him returned a few times. She always approached slowly, keeping enough distance not to invade. She would sit nearby, on the floor, as if she wanted to be at his height. She didn't speak much, she just watched. At first, the cat would look away, accustomed to being ignored, but over time he began to stare back at her for a few seconds longer. There was something in that constant presence that confused him. There was no demand, there was no irritation, only permanence. He didn't know how to interpret this. Permanence to him was synonymous with abandonment. It meant staying because there was no choice. But that woman seemed to stay by decision. This difference was so vast that the cat could not fully process it. Still, his body began to relax in small moments. A slightly deeper breath, a slower blink, a less tense ear. Even so, the true turning point did not happen immediately. The turn began as a nearly invisible detail, exactly as he had always been. One day, when one of the people approached to change his water, the cat did not recoil. He stayed where he was, not because he trusted completely, but because for the first time he did not feel the need to disappear. This small gesture went unnoticed by those accustomed to seeing big changes, but for him, it was a revolution. With time, he began to explore the space around him, first with his eyes, then with small steps. The floor was clean, soft in some spots, and it didn't smell like mold. There were quiet corners, places where he could hide if he wanted. Still, he didn't seek a hiding place immediately. He walked slowly, testing each step, as if he were relearning how to exist without constant fear. In one of those moments of exploration, he found a low mirror on the wall. He saw his own image and took a while to recognize it. The thin body, the dull fur, the tired eyes. The image looked like an animal that should have given up a long time ago. He stood still for a few seconds, staring at that reflection as if it were another being. Then he looked away, as he always did. Seeing himself that way was too uncomfortable. While the cat recovered, the story began to spread outside. Not as grand news, but as a growing commentary. Neighbors talking, people remembering, some trying to justify. He was always quiet. He managed on his own. We thought he belonged to someone. Each phrase was an attempt to ease a guilt that now seemed inevitable. But the more they justified, the clearer the truth became. No one wanted to step up. No one wanted to look. The cat, knowing nothing of this, felt the world around him change in concrete ways. Food came frequently. Water was always available. The cold did not invade his body during the night, and, perhaps strangest of all, no one pushed him away when he existed in the same space. He could be there, just there, without being. Shoved into a corner, still. There was something that could not be repaired quickly. The cat carried within him the memory of years of being at the back of the line, the forgotten one, the one who didn't matter. This memory does not scream. It whispers in small decisions, in hesitating before eating, in shrinking when a hand approaches, in not purring even when the food is good. He did not know how to trust, because he was never taught. The woman who found him noticed this. One day, she approached with a small blanket and placed it at a certain distance, letting him choose. She didn't try to push him onto it. She didn't try to pick him up. She simply offered. The cat looked at the blanket for a long time. Then, slowly, he approached and lay down on it. It wasn't explicit gratitude, it was acceptance. In that moment, something inside him changed, not in a dramatic way, but profoundly. He realized that perhaps he no longer needed to survive as if he were invisible. Perhaps he could exist without apologizing for taking up space. This realization was frightening, but also liberating. That was when the conversation that would define his destiny arrived. The people around him discussed where he would go, who could care for him, if there was any chance of him being adopted. Some said it would be difficult. He is very closed off. He suffered too much. Others insisted he deserved a real chance. The cat didn't understand the words, but he felt the weight of them. He felt that his life was being decided, and this time he was not just a detail, and that was the biggest turning point of all. The cat's fate began to be discussed in a low voice, as if everyone there knew they were dealing with something far too fragile for abrupt decisions. He did not understand the words, but he perceived the atmosphere. It was not chaotic urgency, nor indifference. It was care mixed with doubt. For the first time in his life, he was not a problem to be ignored, but a real responsibility to be assumed. The following days were of slow adaptation. His body remained weak, even with regular feeding and a warm environment. There were moments when he felt better, walked a few more steps, explored a new corner. In others, exhaustion forced him to lie down and simply exist. No one pressured him. No one demanded progress. This absence of demand was something he had never experienced. Throughout his entire life, he had learned that, in order not to be a bother, he needed to disappear. Now they were allowing him to be exactly as he was. Even so, memory did not fade. Every human gesture was still analyzed with caution. When someone approached too closely, his body stiffened. When a hand reached out, he hesitated. There was no aggressiveness, only defense. Years of being at the back of the line, the one who was not chosen, the one who was left behind, left invisible marks. The cat did not trust what came too easily. Life had taught him that everything could be taken away at any moment. While he recovered, people connected to the old house began to appear. Some came out of curiosity, others out of guilt. There were questions, pointed comments, attempts to justify the past. He was always quiet. He never caused trouble. We thought someone was looking after him. The phrases repeated like a defensive mantra. No one said, "We didn't want to." But the silence between the words said everything. The woman who found him listened to it all with contained patience. She did not confront anyone directly. She didn't need to. The image of the fragile cat, surviving alone for so long, spoke louder than any accusation. His presence there was living proof of what happens when no one wants to take responsibility. The cat, oblivious to these discussions, remained lying in his corner, watching everything with attentive eyes, as he had always done. There was a day when someone tried to pick him up, not out of malice but out of impulse. The cat reacted immediately, shrinking his body, emitting a low warning sound. He did not attack, he did not run away. He simply made it clear that he was not yet ready. The person stepped back, apologizing in a low voice. That apology, simple and late, hung in the air for a few seconds. The cat did not respond, but something inside him registered that retreat. For the first time, someone respected his limit. As the weeks passed, he began to show small changes. He did not purr openly, but he no longer shrank away so much. He spent more time out of the corners. Sometimes he remained close to people without moving away immediately. They were minimal gestures, almost invisible, exactly as he had always been. But now, someone was looking. The final decision arrived silently. There was no solemn announcement, only a long, thoughtful conversation, full of fears. The cat would not be returned to the old house. That part of the story was closed. Nor would he be handed over to just anyone. He needed someone willing to accept his time, his silence, his marks, someone who understood that love does not erase abandonment, but can prevent it from continuing. When the day for the final move arrived, the cat was placed in a transport box left open for a while, so he could choose to enter. He observed the interior for several minutes, hesitating. The past had taught him that choices were rarely real. Still, slowly, he entered. Not with full confidence, but with cautious resignation. The world was changing again, and he had no way to stop it. The new place was smaller, quieter, more stable. There was no constant rushing, no loud voices. There was routine. The cat explored every corner with care, smelling everything, testing the floor, watching the light come through the windows. He found places where he could hide if he wanted to, and that reassured him. Having the option to hide was important, not out of fear, but for control. At night, lying on a soft surface, he took a long time to fall asleep. Not out of anxiety, but out of habit. For years, sleeping deeply meant risk. Now, the silence carried no threat. Still, his body took time to believe it. His breathing gradually slowed down. For the first time, he fell asleep without being on total alert. Time went on. There was no miraculous transformation. The cat did not suddenly become affectionate. He did not start seeking laps. He did not forget the past. He just continued existing, now in a space where existing was not a mistake. Sometimes he sat near people, other times he preferred to be alone. No one pressured him. This freedom, simple and rare, was all he needed. On the human side, the story left marks. Some learned, others preferred to forget. But the truth remained. When nobody wanted him, he stayed. When everyone left, he was all that remained. And only then did they realize his value. Not because he changed, but because the silence became too loud to be ignored. Before closing this chapter, I leave an important request. If you have made it this far, leave your like now. Subscribe to the channel. I have a dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers, and every subscription makes an enormous difference. And tell me in the comments, would you have noticed this cat before he became all that remained? Not every story talks about happy endings. Some talk about late responsibility. This is one of them. The cat in this story was not rejected in an explicit way. He was set aside, forgotten, treated like something that could wait indefinitely, and while everyone else had choices, he remained, not out of love, but out of a lack of options. When nobody wanted him, he learned to disappear. When everyone left, he continued to be there. And only then, when there was no one else left, did his presence become impossible to ignore. This is the most uncomfortable part to face. Often, we only value what remains when everything else disappears. The cat survived, but he carries invisible marks. And this is not a failure, it is a consequence. Care arrived late, but it arrived. This doesn't always erase the past, but it can change the future. May this story serve as a silent reminder. Not every plea comes in the form of words, and not every pain makes a noise. Sometimes all someone needs is to be seen before it is too late.